talking last time about the concept of humility. Now, humility is a crucial part of the process to be able to advance in serving God, to be able to create this relationship. And we explained that with regards to Kabbalat Torah, this is the beginning and it's the ultimate goal. It's the beginning of the process because of the fact that a person has to subdue themselves and subjugate their own wills and desires to something beyond themselves. And we explained that was the idea of escape from Egypt, to just run away from the negativity and say, okay, I might want it. I might, this is what I desire, but I'm not going there. And then the ultimate goal is to be able to gain this level of devotion, of total and absolute focus, and on Hashem and on Torah and mitzvot, and total and absolute connection on a constant basis. And we said in order to be able to accomplish that higher level of devotion, a person has to empty themselves. A person has to be an empty vessel. You have to empty yourselves of your desires, not just of your physical, material desires, not just of negative desires, but even of spiritual desires, because a person, as long as a person is focused on themselves, there's already some kind of ego involved. There's already some kind of distraction. So that's the concept we're discussing. So now we want to crack it into a little bit deeper. And this is going back to the Maamarim that we spoke about, Lo Tiyeh Meshakela, where he talks about the idea that through our service of God or through our lack of service, we can create a defect in the receptacle. And we're going to talk a little bit about this today. And we explained that this was, when we talk about whether or not God wants or cares, that was the conversation, whether God cares or not. We said that ultimately God wants a relationship, because the entirety of creation is for us, for there to be a relationship. And if we don't create the relationship, then it's all going to waste. And the details of that relationship are very much not that God is not so much concerned with the idea, because the details are really dependent on each person individually. And so that concept fits really beautifully with what we're saying, that a person needs to be on the ramp, that a person needs to be involved in some kind of way, putting the effort to be able to connect, and the exact manifestations of how they connect and where they connect and when and all that, that's not nearly as important as the fact that they connect. There's a story told of the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov was once informed that there's somebody out there who serves God better than you do. And obviously he wanted to meet this person, so he went with his students, and they went out to wherever the vision had brought them to, and they found themselves watching a shepherd. And the shepherd was actually quite ignorant, did not know very much about anything. But as things are settled, his sheep are eating in the pasture, he starts praying. And his prayer is not your standard prayer. His prayer is basically something like this: God, I love you so much and I care about you so much. What can I do for you? What I can do for you is what I know how to do. I know how to do somersaults. And the shepherd starts doing somersaults, just constant somersaults, till he completes, just completely collapses from exhaustion. After a little while, he recovers and he says, God, I care about you so much. I love you so much. I want to do something. I don't know exactly what to do. I did my somersaults. My body is I'm shot. And now what I can do is I can play my flute. And he plays his flute with, until he's completely winded. And he keeps doing this with these little things that are just, they seem to be quite, simplistic. But they were done with such wholeheartedness. The Baal Shem Tov says, here you see somebody who is serving God better than me. Is he a complete Jew in the entirety of things? Certainly not. He has so much to learn. He has to learn how to read Hebrew. He has to learn how to, to follow halacha and all those other details. But his connection to God, his devotion, his service is absolutely complete. And so that's really an important idea. And that is not necessarily about the details. The details are important because that's how you continuously move up the rung. But the fact of the matter is that being on the ramp means the connection, the desire that there should be a connection. And so that's this idea of these receptacles, so to speak, being a receptacle for God's energy, creating a receptacle through the mitzvot that we do, and making sure that those receptacles are done wholeheartedly and complete and not broken, so that they leak, so that they don't hold the energy of God that we're meant to receive. So this brings us to this other mimer. This is a mimer of the Rebbe Rashab, and it's actually based on a mimer of the Alter Rebbe, but the Alter Rebbe does not expand this concept at all. On the other hand, the Rebbe Rashab really broadens the idea so that we can really understand it much broader. And this is looking at things instead of in terms of understanding the receptacle. This is understanding what a broken receptacle is. And a little bit of the background to this story. When I was studying in Sydney, studying Bar Smicha, one of the things that we were doing there was we were learning with people in the community. And there was a gentleman exactly like yourselves. His name is Ivan. And we were learning one mimer, we learned another mimer. And then I said, okay, what do you want to learn next? He said, I actually want to learn about Kriyat Shema. I said, sure, that's, it's very, very easy. We say Shema every single night, and the prayers are very beautiful. Start with the Ribono Shel Olam, which is forgiving everybody for anything that you did every single day. I don't know about you guys, but that's one of those prayers that I kind of bumble through and try not to pay too much attention to because it's not necessarily so easy to do, but okay, we'll keep moving on that. On a completely side note, there was a lawyer that I had a little bit of a relationship with, and he asked me about this prayer that we say on Yom Kippur that forgives everybody. And I said, I don't know about Yom Kippur. There's this other prayer. I was very happy because it obviously means he's trying to, he's an intense fellow, so he's trying to forgive people. He went through a divorce. So I told him about this prayer. I gave him a translation of it. He said, no, that's not what I was looking for. A couple of days later, he sends me an email. He says, I found it, some kind of reform prayer that they put in the middle of Yom Kippur. And then the next day, my wife says, did you see Miles' Facebook post? I said, no. When I go onto Facebook, he tattooed the prayer onto his arm. And I was like, oh, man, that was not exactly what I was hoping that you would do. Certainly not expected in any way whatsoever. But the meaning was I guess was nice or something like that. But then you go from that Ashkivenu, asking God to grant us to lie down in peace, Shema Yisrael, of course, with all the spirituality of Shema Yisrael, and then the prayer gets to get really, really weird. I don't know if you've ever said the Shema prayer before going to bed, but it's very strange. We have these mentions about 60 men sitting around King Solomon's bed, and all of them have swords, and they're all going to protect him from evil. And okay, then we've got Tachnun. Tachnun, of course, is asking God for forgiveness of the things that we did that day. And then we get to this prayer that, on its face, makes no sense whatsoever. And I later, more recently, actually found out that this prayer was composed by the Arizal. And I'm going to read it to you. May it be your will, Lord, our God, and the God of our fathers, that if I have sinned by mistake, on purpose, or rebelliously before you, so far so good, right? And caused an imperfection in the letter Yud of your great name, Yud Kei Vav Kei, by neglecting to say the Shema prayer. and also in the letter Aleph of your name, Aleph Dad Lin Nun Yud. And it was therefore ruled in your righteous court of law that I deserve the punishment of stoning or similar punishment. I hereby accept upon myself stoning, and I am considered as if I have been stoned by the letter Aleph of your name, Aleph Dal Nun Yun, in the great court of law in Jerusalem for the sake of the glory of your name. What are we talking about here? And just to clarify to everybody, if you did not say Shema, Rabbi Smith is not going to come and stone you. Just to clarify, in case you were wondering. The punishment, so to speak, for not saying Shema, it is a mitzvah to say, is not something that gets direct punishment, and certainly not the death penalty. The prayer continues and says, and if I have sinned by mistake, on purpose, or rebelliously before you and caused an imperfection in the first letter, Hey, of your great name, by neglecting to put on tefillin, and also in the letter Dalid of your name, Aleph Dalid Nun Yud, and was therefore ruled in your righteous court of law that I deserve the punishment of burning or similar, it should be considered as if I have been burned by the letter Dalid. Not putting on tefillin, again, this is a mitzvah to say, you do not get the death penalty for this. It does not incur the death penalty. The next paragraph, and if I've sinned by mistake, etc., and cause an imperfection in the letter Vav of your great name, Yud-Kei-Vav-Kei, by neglecting the mitzvah of Tzitzit, and also in the letter Nun of your name, Aleph Daled Nun Yud, and therefore I deserve beheading. Once again, a mitzvah to say, and it does not incur the punishment of beheading. And the final mitzvah, and if I've been sinned by mistake and caused an imperfection in the last letter, the Hey of your great name, by neglecting prayer and the letter Yud, and it was therefore ruled in your righteous court of law that I deserve the punishment of choking or similar punishment I accept upon myself, and that I've been choked by the letter Yud of your name, Adonai. Aleph Daled Nun Yud. So what is this prayer? Again, some things you can kind of basically, the prayer that we mentioned before about 60 angels around, 60 armed men around King Solomon's bed, that I had some kind of understanding of what was going on there. Here, I had been saying this prayer for, at that point, almost 10 years, or something like that, maybe 8 years or whatever it was. And I had not the slightest clue. I'd never given one thought to it whatsoever, and not realized that the prayer itself makes no sense. It's completely. So I went over to the rabbi. I said to him, Rabbi, what is going on here? Can you please? So he started laughing. Obviously he was like, oh, good morning. I'm glad you finally paid attention to this. And he pointed out a mimer of the Rebbe Rashab, the fifth Rebbe of Chabad, where actually two Maamarim with the one following the other, from Sukkot in 1904, excuse me. And in that mimer, he starts talking about this concept of the relationship and the receptacle, so to speak, that we create, and also reflecting on the damage that we can cause by our behavior. And he brings this prayer and he explains this prayer and he says, what is this prayer we're talking about? And he explains the following. Let's see. He says, we're not necessarily talking about an actual sin at all. When we're saying this prayer is not talking about somebody that actually neglected to say Shema, or actually neglected to put on tzitzit, or actually neglected to put on tefillin. What we're talking about is that the person was lacking in the service of God that those mitzvot represent. And so therefore, what happens is a spiritual defect is created that causes us to have a certain, what we would call a spiritual disease. And the spiritual disease is that which we would describe as by one of the four deaths, one of the four capital punishments. So we're not talking about a physical sin, and we're not talking about a physical punishment. We're completely talking about the spiritual ideas, and this is really important when we're talking about this idea of how we create the receptacle and how we strengthen this relationship between us and God, and how that is kept alive and kept energized. And of course, we can look at it by the negative. And he explains as follows. The first paragraph had said that if I cause an imperfection in the letter Yud, I'll rename by neglecting Kriyat Shema. So he says, what is Kriyat Shema? Kriyat Shema, the purpose, the idea of Kriyat Shema is to unify God, is to recognize that the world as they are, everything about the world is really unified with God. And so when we're talking about the concept of neglecting Kriyat Shema, what we're saying is that we are not allowing ourselves to recognize that everything is godly. And most of all, we might be considered even ourselves, that we ourselves are an existence to ourselves. That our personal selves are separate, so to speak, from God. That would be the spiritual concept of Kriyat Shema. Caesar is pointing out that it has not come out in the Sephardic Nusach, very, very possibly because it's in Nusach Ari. The Arizal was the one who wrote it, so therefore it is. I'm not sure in what other Nuschaot it is. I'll send a copy of it later to Rabbi Smith and ask him to send out to everybody. So this idea, when a person thinks that the world is its own existence, or we think that we ourselves are our own existence, what we are doing is we are idolizing something. We are saying that something besides for God. And that is a spiritual idolatry. It's not physical idolatry, God forbid. Physical idolatry is that you decide that this rock is God. This river is God. It's a spiritual idolatry. A spiritual idolatry is that you are saying that there is something else besides God. I'm not saying those words, but basically you might be living in that world. And what's the spiritual corollary of that? Skila. Skila is that a person is stoned. A stone, actually, the actual process of skila, the first part of this process is that the stone is thrown upon the person's heart. And the Torah uses the term that a person has, Vasiroti lev ha'even mikir b'cha, that I will remove your heart of stone from within you. And so the idea of stoning, the spiritual stoning, is that when a person has this attitude, their heart becomes insensitive towards godliness. They get a heart of stone. So it's the spiritual corollary. When you behave in a certain manner, when you don't absorb the concepts of godliness, when a person kind of looks at them, a person could be checking off every single box in the Jewish system, so to speak. But if they're not recognizing the basic concept, then they end up with a stoned heart. And that is the spiritual concept of stoning. That's a disease that we may be suffering from, because we've created a receptacle that is defective. That even though we have done everything that we need to do, so we think we're saying Shema, we're doing whatever needs to be done, but the receptacle itself is defective because we're not doing it in an appropriate way. The way to, of course, avoid that is by absorbing this concept of Kriyat Shema, that the Kriyat Shema is no longer just a single moment of your day, but it enthuses your entire day. The entire day is a Kriyat Shema day. And as a result of that, you don't have the Leva Evan, you don't have a heart of stone, because of the fact that you're able to live godliness. So that's the first part of the prayer. And we're not going to be able to get through all of the prayer today, but we'll just go to the second one, and then we'll do the next two, God willing, after Shavuot. The second one was, and this has to do, by the way, it has to do with the letter Yud. He does not explain the letter Aleph of the name Adonai. He does not explain that in the Maamarim specifically, but the letter Yud represents Chachma. Chachma is the kernel of the idea. And the kernel of the idea is not just a moment, but also represents bittul, nullification. And that's really been a serious theme throughout everything that we've been talking about, that the way to be able to access this is through bittul. So when one causes a defect in the Yud of God's name, when one causes a defect by doing what? By lack of their nullification to God, by thinking that the world is its own existence, and that's how they create a defect in the relationship. So that was the first part of the prayer. The second part of the prayer is that if I have sinned by mistake, on purpose, or rebelliously before you, and caused an imperfection in the first letter Hey of your great name, Yud Kei Vav Kei, by neglecting to put on tefillin, and also in the letter Dalit of your name Adonai, and it was therefore ruled in your righteous court of law that I deserve the punishment of burning or similar punishment. So tefillin is actually, according to Kabbalah, it's the idea of what's referred to as mochin de gadlut. Mochin de gadlut means expansiveness of mind. And expansiveness of mind means that the mind is able to direct the emotion. The concept of tefillin is meant to be that we drive our actions based on an intellectual understanding. We're supposed to understand these ideas, and we draw them into ourselves. First intellect, then afterwards action. So when a person lacks that power, and that's done through the faculty of Hey, the first Hey refers to Bina. Bina is the faculty that expands and understands the ideas in a broader way. It's how we study Torah. It's how we think of the ideas of Torah. But specifically, the idea is not just that they should be, just intellectual concepts by themselves, but they're meant to influence ourselves, influence our emotions in such a way that our emotions are directed in a way that is sensible, that is grounded, that is godly. When a person does not apply the idea of tefillin in their lives, what do they get? They get sreifa. Sreifa means burning. Burning is misplaced passion, misplaced energy, misplaced fire. All of those energies and fire and passion, all those things that we have inside us that need to be guided in a particular way, the energy needs to be focused in a particular way. Instead of going in the correct area, it's going in the incorrect area. And that's the concept of sreifa. So because we, God forbid, caused a defect in the hay, that we're not allowing the hay to be able to be brought into the proper place, we're not absorbing the concept of the hay, we're not absorbing the concept of the understanding that we're meant to guide our emotions. As a result of that, the emotions, they run amok. And that is sreifa. To be continued. But any comments or questions? Go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, I wanted to say for those that it might help, the part of the prayer you said in the Chabad newer book, it's on page 145.
There we go. Yashar koach. Oh, well, I hope everybody has a wonderful Shavuot. Oh, no, we're going to see you on Friday. We'll see you on Friday. We'll continue this on Friday, and we'll go from there.
Thank you, Rabbi.
For the delay.